emotional about the hounding of the press and the paparazzi and how they were making her life miserable. So I think I did my job.
Once he was America's golden boy of morning television, adored by millions. But one scandal destroyed it all in a single headline. Today, we reveal how Matt Lauer went from fame and fortune to being blacklisted, and what his life looks like now. Matt Lauer wasn't born into fame or privilege. In fact, his early life in New York was largely ordinary, a middle-class upbringing that, on the surface, offered no hint of the household name he would one day become. Born in 1957, Lauer showed an early interest in communication and storytelling, traits that would later define his career. Friends and teachers remembered a boy who was curious, ambitious, and determined to make his mark on the world. Little did anyone know those qualities would propel him to the very top of American television. After college, Lauer began his career in local news, working behind the scenes and eventually moving in front of the camera. He honed his skills in the regional broadcast circuit, learning the intricacies of journalism, how to ask the right questions, manage interviews, and command attention without seeming overbearing. It was a path many aspiring journalists take, but few manage to ascend beyond local recognition. Lauer, however, had a combination of natural charm, diligence, and an unyielding ambition that set him apart. By the early 1980s, Lauer had caught the attention of NBC executives. His charisma and polished delivery made him an ideal fit for national television. In 1982, he began making appearances on The Today Show, initially as a correspondent. His reports were professional yet engaging, and audiences responded immediately to his approachable demeanor. He wasn't just reading the news, he was telling stories in a way that resonated with viewers across the country. It wasn't long before Lauer's star began to rise. By the early 1990s, he had become a co-anchor of The Today Show, one of the most coveted positions in American morning television. This role placed him in the homes of millions every morning, turning him into a familiar, trusted presence. His influence extended beyond journalism. He was shaping public opinion, breaking celebrity news, and becoming a cultural touchstone. Lauer's success wasn't just due to talent. It was also strategic. He cultivated relationships with colleagues, executives, and celebrities alike, positioning himself as someone who could be relied upon both on and off camera. He was meticulous about his appearance, timing, and presentation, understanding that every detail contributed to the perception of credibility. By the mid-1990s, Lauer was not only a co-anchor, but also a symbol of professional success, someone the public admired and emulated. Awards and accolades followed. Lauer earned numerous Emmys, nominations, and recognitions for his contributions to journalism and television. His interviews with world leaders, celebrities, and everyday people alike became widely cited, solidifying his reputation as one of the most influential broadcasters of his generation. Behind the camera, colleagues described him as ambitious and determined, a man who would go to extraordinary lengths to secure a story or elevate the show. Yet, even at the height of his success, whispers of ambition bordering on obsession began to circulate. Behind the polished smile and practiced demeanor, some staffers noticed a more controlling, exacting side. Lauer wanted perfection on set. Every angle, every question, every segment timed to the second. While many admired this professionalism, others found it intimidating, even exhausting. The same drive that had made him a star also sowed the seeds for tension in his professional relationships. By the time the 2000s arrived, Lauer was at the peak of his career. He was a household name, earning millions in salary, enjoying immense influence and commanding respect within the entertainment industry. Yet, as history would show, the very traits that had propelled him to fame, ambition, control, and an unwavering desire for success, would also contribute to a dramatic and public fall from grace. By the mid-2000s, Matt Lauer had become a symbol of morning television embodying professionalism, charm, and authority. Millions woke up to his face every day, trusting his words, admiring his poise, and assuming that the man they saw on TV was the man he was in real life. But behind the carefully curated smile and impeccable wardrobe, a darker reality was beginning to emerge. For years, rumors circulated within NBC and the television industry about Lauer's behavior off-camera. Colleagues whispered of inappropriate advances, boundary crossing, and a tendency to exploit his position of power. At the time, these whispers were largely dismissed by management and the public, buried under a veneer of respectability. After Bay, Lauer was not just a star, he was the Today Show, the face that advertisers, networks, and viewers associated with trust and morning routine. Challenging him publicly was unthinkable. Insiders described a man who wielded influence like a weapon. Lauer was meticulous about his reputation, knowing how to charm, intimidate, or manipulate depending on the situation. In interviews, he was articulate and engaging. In private, some employees reported that he could be controlling, demanding, absolute discretion, and quick to punish anyone who threatened his image. A former producer later recalled, Matt could be incredibly generous on camera, but behind the scenes, he had this side, a side that made you afraid to cross him. Everyone knew to keep quiet. The allegations that would eventually surface in 2017 were not entirely out of the blue. There were stories of inappropriate behavior spanning decades, many of them carefully hushed to protect the brand of NBC and the reputation of its flagship show. Complaints about Lauer's conduct were sometimes filed internally, but they were often handled discreetly, minimized, or ignored altogether. Colleagues described a culture of fear, where reporting misconduct could end careers or attract retaliation. One former employee said, "We all knew something wasn't right, but how do you confront a man who literally controls your career?" Matt Lauer was untouchable. This combination of charm, celebrity, and authority allowed him to maintain an impeccable public persona, even as private behavior painted a much more troubling picture. Meanwhile, Lauer's career continued to soar. His interviews with celebrities and politicians drew record audiences. He hosted charity events, received industry awards, and appeared on magazine covers as the golden boy of journalism. Audiences loved him. Advertisers loved him. NBC loved him. The world, however, was largely unaware of what was happening behind closed doors. The secrecy was aided by the culture of television at the time. Morning shows like Today relied on trust and consistency. Producers, anchors, and networks were invested in maintaining the illusion of a family-friendly, reliable broadcast. In this environment, difficult questions about personal misconduct were often sidestepped. Lauer became adept at controlling the narrative, presenting himself as kind, professional, and devoted to journalism, even as allegations quietly mounted. It was only a matter of time before the carefully constructed image began to crumble. Staffers began speaking up, emboldened by changing cultural norms and a growing awareness that power could no longer shield misconduct. Investigations that had previously been ignored now gained traction. Former colleagues began to share their experiences anonymously, revealing a pattern of behavior that was far from isolated. Lauer's secret life, long hidden behind the glow of television cameras and PR campaigns, started to enter public view. For years, viewers had trusted Lauer implicitly. His face represented reliability, confidence, and credibility. When the stories emerged, the betrayal felt personal to millions. Audiences struggled to reconcile the man they had admired with the man described in allegations, a man who abused his power, manipulated staff, and violated boundaries. This duality, public hero, private predator, became the defining aspect of Lauer's legacy. It also underscored a larger issue within media institutions, how easily power can shield misconduct and how difficult it is for victims to come forward when the perpetrator is a beloved figure. Experts noted that Lauer's case was emblematic of systemic failures, a reminder that charisma and fame do not equate to morality or accountability. By the time the allegations were made public, the narrative had shifted dramatically. Matt Lauer, once untouchable, became a cautionary tale. The man who had built a career on trust and relatability was now facing the harsh consequences of secrecy, abuse, and deception. His private life, long hidden behind the morning show's bright lights, had finally been exposed, leaving the public, the network, and colleagues to grapple with a reality that had been simmering for years. And yet, even amid the scandal, there were complex layers to consider. Lauer was not just a villain, he was a product of a system that allowed unchecked power and a culture that prioritized ratings over accountability. His story, though deeply troubling, is also a lens into the darker side of fame. How the very qualities that elevate someone to stardom can also conceal the behaviors that eventually lead to their downfall. November 2017 marked a turning point, not just for Matt Lauer, but for morning television and the wider cultural conversation about power, privilege, and accountability. For decades, Lauer had been untouchable, the face of the Today Show, a trusted journalist, a celebrity whose influence stretched across homes nationwide. But in a single news cycle, that carefully curated persona unraveled. The story broke, with explosive allegations of sexual misconduct spanning years. Multiple women came forward, describing inappropriate behavior that crossed professional boundaries, often taking place in the supposed safety of NBC's studios and offices. The allegations were detailed, consistent, and in many cases corroborated by colleagues who had witnessed troubling patterns of conduct. NBC acted swiftly. Within hours of the allegations becoming public, Lauer was fired. His termination was abrupt, shocking both viewers and co-workers alike. The network released a statement condemning his actions and emphasizing that they would not tolerate harassment in any form. For many, it was a watershed moment, proof that no one, not even a high-profile anchor, was above accountability. The media frenzy was immediate and relentless. Headlines painted a stark picture. A career built over decades, destroyed overnight. Clips of Lauer smiling at morning news cameras were juxtaposed with breaking news banners detailing his misconduct. The contrast was jarring. The familiar, trusted face of television now a symbol of betrayal and scandal. Public reaction was intense. Social media erupted, with fans expressing disbelief, anger, and a sense of personal betrayal. To millions, Lauer had been more than an anchor. He had been part of their morning routine, a fixture in their homes. The revelation that he had allegedly abused that trust created a cultural shockwave. People struggled to reconcile the charming professional image they knew with the disturbing reality revealed in the allegations. Industry insiders weighed in as well. Colleagues and former employees described a pattern of behavior that had been long tolerated, often ignored due to Lauer's status. Some admitted to complicity, whether through silence or by turning a blind eye. Others expressed shock that someone so publicly revered could engage in such actions. The scandal became a case study in how power, fame, and gender dynamics can intersect to create toxic workplace environments. Lauer himself remained largely silent initially. Statements released on his behalf were brief, expressing regret and acknowledging that he had behaved in ways that were inappropriate. Critics and supporters alike noted the absence of personal accountability in those statements, interpreting them as attempts to mitigate further damage. Lawyers and publicists managed the messaging carefully, but the court of public opinion had already passed judgment. The scandal's impact extended beyond Lauer personally. NBC faced criticism for failing to address misconduct earlier, with internal emails and investigations revealing missed opportunities to intervene. the network's credibility took a hit, forcing executives to reevaluate policies and implement stricter safeguards against harassment. Lauer's firing became a turning point not only for the Today Show, but also for corporate accountability in media institutions. Meanwhile, awards, honors, and recognitions accumulated over decades were reassessed. Emmys and other accolades became symbols of a past era, now shadowed by scandal. Public appearances and interviews were canceled, and Lauer effectively vanished from mainstream media. The once powerful journalist, whose every word had been watched and listened to, now found himself isolated, shunned, and unemployable. The fallout sparked broader cultural debates. Commentators and journalists debated the role of celebrity, privilege, and the mechanisms that allow misconduct to persist. Lauer's case became emblematic of a societal shift, a moment where silence could no longer protect wrongdoing, and where the public demanded accountability from even the most admired figures. For Lauer, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. His career, carefully cultivated over decades, was over. His reputation, once synonymous with trust and professionalism, was tarnished beyond repair. Financial losses, personal strain, and public disgrace compounded the impact. What had once been a secure, celebrated position became a cautionary tale about power and responsibility. In retrospect, the scandal that ended Lauer's career was as much about systemic failure as individual wrongdoing. It highlighted how institutions can shield abusive behavior and how fame can delay justice. At the same time, it served as a reminder that accountability, though often delayed, can eventually prevail. Matt Lauer's story, once one of admiration and success, had been irrevocably altered. The golden boy of morning television was no longer untouchable. His public fall served as a stark lesson. In a world increasingly unwilling to excuse misconduct, no one is above consequence, not even a household name who once seemed invincible. Since the scandal that ended his career in 2017, Matt Lauer has largely retreated from public life. The once omnipresent figure on morning television, whose face greeted millions of Americans every day, now moves through the world with far less scrutiny, yet carries the indelible mark of his downfall. Where once he commanded attention, he now seeks privacy, avoiding the cameras that once documented every moment of his life. Following his termination from NBC, Lauer faced not just professional consequences, but personal ones as well. His marriage ended in divorce, and the strain on family relationships was widely reported. Colleagues and former friends described a man grappling with isolation, cut off from the network that had once been his home, and from the industry that had once celebrated him. Though he has largely avoided public appearances, reports indicate that Lauer's life has become quiet, removed from the spotlight. He is no longer a household name in the same way. The admiration and trust that once accompanied him have been replaced by skepticism and wariness. Some sources suggest he maintains connections with close family and a small circle of confidants, but the era of fame, influence, and celebrity, access is gone. Attempts at a comeback, if considered, have been minimal and largely unsuccessful. Lauer has not returned to mainstream journalism, nor has he sought high-profile media projects. His legacy, overshadowed by scandal, has made it nearly impossible to regain the level of trust necessary for a public-facing role. Industry insiders note that in today's media landscape, where accountability and transparency are demanded by audiences, a figure with Lauer's history faces significant barriers to re-entry. Yet, even in obscurity, Lauer's story continues to spark reflection and debate. Experts in media ethics point to his downfall as a case study in how institutions handle power, harassment, and misconduct. The narrative is a reminder that professional success does not excuse personal failings, and that unchecked authority can have lasting, destructive consequences. Culturally, Lauer's fall serves as a cautionary tale. It highlights how charisma, fame, and influence can shield wrongdoing, but only temporarily. Public figures may be admired, trusted, or celebrated, but their actions, if harmful, eventually come to light. The reactions to his scandal also underscore a societal shift. Audiences no longer passively accept misconduct, even from beloved figures. Accountability, transparency, and ethical behavior have become essential expectations for public figures. For many, Lauer's story is also about the fragility of celebrity. One day, a television host can be adored and influential. The next, the same person can be ostracized and vilified. His experience serves as a stark reminder that reputation, while powerful, is also vulnerable, and that the consequences of misconduct can extend far beyond professional setbacks, affecting personal relationships, mental health, and public perception. In reflecting on Lauer's current life, one can see both loss and caution. The man who once shaped morning television and influenced the lives of millions now lives largely out of view, a figure whose actions have defined his legacy more than his achievements. The golden boy of NBC, the trusted anchor, and the household name have all been replaced by a complex cautionary narrative about power, trust, and accountability.